In a quiet town nestled just outside the bustling city, there lived a man named Richard Hartman. To most people, he was an enigma, a billionaire who seemed untouchable, almost mythical. His name appeared in newspapers and on billboards, always, tied to some grand business deal or charitable donation. Yet, despite his wealth and success, Richard carried a heaviness inside him that no amount of money could lift. He was a man who had built an empire, but often felt like he'd lost everything that truly mattered. Richard's life revolved around work. Meetings, phone calls, and endless emails consumed his days. But every evening, without fail, he would go home to his son, Daniel. At 17, Daniel was bright, curious, and full of dreams. However, life hadn't been kind to him physically. Born with a condition that made walking difficult, Daniel relied on crutches to get around. Despite this challenge, he faced the world with courage, even though he sometimes felt invisible to those around him. Richard loved his son deeply, but love wasn't something he knew how to express easily. Instead of spending time together, Richard tried to make up for his absence by showering Daniel with expensive gifts, gadgets, trips, anything he thought might bring happiness. But deep down, Richard knew it wasn't enough. He saw the longing in Daniel's eyes, the way he looked, at other fathers and sons laughing together. It broke Richard's heart, but he didn't know how to fix it. One Friday evening, after a particularly grueling week at the office, Richard decided to take Daniel out for dinner. He wanted to do something simple, something normal. So instead of choosing one of the fancy restaurants downtown, he drove them to a small diner on the edge of town. The place was called Mama Lou's, and it had a charm that big city eateries lacked. Its walls were painted a warm yellow, and old records hung as decorations. A jukebox played softly in the corner, filling the air with soulful tunes. When they walked in, the hostess greeted them with a smile and led them to a booth near the window. The diner wasn't crowded, but it buzzed with life. Families laughed over plates of fried chicken, friends chatted animatedly over milkshakes, and couples danced slowly by the jukebox. Richard glanced at Daniel, hoping he'd enjoy the atmosphere. For once, his son seemed relaxed, taking in the sights and sounds with genuine interest. Their waitress arrived shortly after they sat down. Her name tag read, Maya, and she had a warmth about her that instantly put people at ease. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with dark skin that glowed under the soft lighting. Her curly hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and her uniform, a crisp white shirt and black apron, fit her perfectly. As she approached their table, she moved with a grace that caught Richard's attention. There was something different about her, something hard to put into words. "Good evening, gentlemen," Maya said cheerfully, setting two menus on the table. "Welcome to Mama Lou's. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Her voice was melodic, carrying a hint of southern charm. Richard ordered coffee while Daniel asked for a chocolate milkshake. Maya jotted it down with a nod and promised to return quickly. While they waited, Daniel's gaze drifted toward the dance floor. A slow song was playing now, and a few couples swayed gently in rhythm. Some held each other close, their movements effortless and natural. Others laughed as they stumbled over their own feet, clearly enjoying themselves. Daniel watched silently, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of the table. Richard noticed but said nothing. He assumed his son was simply entertained by the scene. Moments later, Maya returned with their drinks. She placed the steaming cup of coffee in front of Richard and set the frothy milkshake beside Daniel. "Here you go," she said with a smile. Then, noticing Daniel's lingering glance toward the dancers, she paused. Leaning slightly closer, she asked, "Do you like dancing?" Daniel froze, caught off guard by the question. He glanced at his father, unsure how to respond. Richard tensed, ready to politely interject and change the subject. Dancing wasn't something they ever talked about, let alone did. Before Richard could say anything, though, Daniel muttered a shy, "I guess." Maya tilted her head, studying him thoughtfully. Then, with a confidence that surprised both Richard and Daniel, she said, "Well, why don't you join in? We've got plenty of room and the music's perfect right now." Her tone was casual, as if inviting someone to dance was the most natural thing in the world. Richard opened his mouth to decline, but Maya cut him off before he could speak. Looking directly at Daniel, she added, "Don't worry, I'll follow your lead." Those 6 words struck Richard like a thunderbolt. Follow his lead. No one had ever said that to Daniel before. Teachers, classmates, even family members often tried to guide him or help him along, assuming he couldn't manage on his own. But here was this young woman, offering not just inclusion but trust. Trust that Daniel could take charge, however imperfectly, and show her the way. For a moment, silence hung between them. Daniel's cheeks flushed pink and he looked down at his hands, fidgeting nervously. Richard felt torn. Part of him wanted to protect his son from potential embarrassment, but another part, a deeper, quieter part, wondered what might happen if he let this unfold. What if Maya was right? What if following Daniel's lead was exactly what he needed? Finally, Daniel lifted his head. His voice was barely audible, but his words were clear. "Okay." Maya beamed, her smile radiant. Without hesitation, she extended her hand. "Great, let's do it." Daniel hesitated only briefly before placing his hand in hers. With surprising gentleness, Maya helped him out of the booth and onto the dance floor. Richard watched, his breath caught in his throat as Maya positioned herself carefully, giving Daniel space to move at his own pace. The music swelled around them, wrapping the room in its tender embrace. Maya kept her promise, letting Daniel dictate their steps. They weren't perfect, in fact they stumbled more than once, but it didn't matter. Every step, every sway was filled with meaning. For the first time in years, Richard saw his son standing tall, unburdened by self-doubt. And for the first time in just as long, Richard realized that maybe, just maybe, joy wasn't something you could buy. It was something you created, shared, and experienced together. As Daniel and Maya began to dance, the room seemed to shift. The clinking of silverware against plates grew quieter, and conversations paused mid-sentence. People turned their heads, drawn to the sight of the young boy with crutches swaying awkwardly, but determinedly, guided by the calm presence of the waitress. Maya moved with patience, adjusting her steps to match Daniel's rhythm. She didn't rush him or try to correct his movements. Instead, she let him set the pace, trusting him completely. Richard sat frozen in his seat, unable to look away. His coffee cup remained untouched, steam rising into the air unnoticed. He had spent years trying to shield Daniel from discomfort, always stepping in to smooth over rough edges or make things easier. But now, watching his son take tentative steps across the floor, Richard realized he might have been wrong all along. Maybe what Daniel needed wasn't protection. It was trust. Trust that he could handle challenges even if they weren't perfect. The song continued, its melody soft and soothing. Daniel's grip on Maya's hand tightened slightly as he focused on each movement. His face was a mix of concentration and delight, the kind of expression Richard hadn't seen in months. There was no trace of fear or hesitation in his eyes, only determination. For those few minutes, Daniel wasn't defined by his disability. He was simply a teenager dancing. Just like anyone else, Maya's encouragement never wavered. When Daniel stumbled, she steadied him without making a fuss. When he hesitated, she gave him a reassuring nod. Her calm demeanor put everyone at ease, including Daniel himself. And as the final notes of the song played, a spontaneous round of applause erupted from the other diners. Some cheered softly while others wiped tears from their eyes. Even the cook peeked out from the kitchen doorway, smiling at the unexpected moment of beauty. Daniel returned to the table, his cheeks flushed and his breathing slightly uneven. Maya followed close behind, her smile still radiant. "You did." "Great," she said, giving him a gentle pat on the shoulder before turning to Richard. "He's a natural." Richard stared at her, unsure how to respond. His mind raced with thoughts he couldn't quite organize. Pride, gratitude, guilt, they all swirled together, leaving him speechless. Finally, he managed to choke out a single word. "Thank you." Maya shrugged modestly. No need to thank me, it was fun. Then, sensing the weight of the moment, she excused herself to check on her other tables. As she walked away, Richard watched her go, struck by the simplicity of her actions. She hadn't done anything extraordinary, just offered kindness and belief in someone who needed it. Yet in doing so, she had created something profound. That night, on the drive home, Daniel couldn't stop talking about the dance. He described every detail, the way the music felt, the way Maya had smiled at him, the way people had clapped afterward. Richard listened quietly, glancing at his son in the rearview mirror. Daniel's voice was filled with excitement, a sound that had been missing for far too long. Richard felt a lump rise in his throat as he realized how much he'd missed these moments. How many times had he dismissed them because he thought work or money mattered more? When they arrived home, Daniel headed straight to his room, still buzzing with energy. Richard stayed in the car for a while, staring at the steering wheel. He replayed the evening in his mind, focusing on the image of Daniel leading Maya across the dance floor. It wasn't just the act of dancing that had changed things. It was the feeling behind it. For once, Daniel had been seen not as a boy with a disability, but as a person capable of joy and connection. Over the next few days, Richard found himself thinking about Maya often. Who was she? What made her so different from everyone else? He wanted to know more about the woman who had unknowingly shaken him to his core. So, a week later, he decided to take Daniel back to Mama Lou's. This time, it wasn't just for dinner. It was to see Maya again. When they arrived, the diner was busier than before. Families packed the booths, and the jukebox played louder than usual. Richard scanned the room, searching for Maya. When he spotted her weaving between tables with a tray balanced expertly in one hand, he felt a strange sense of relief. She looked the same as she had that night, wearing her uniform with pride and carrying herself with quiet confidence. "Hey there," Maya greeted them warmly when she approached their table. "Back so soon? I guess you liked the milkshake last time." Daniel grinned. "Yeah, it was good, and I wanted to say thanks for helping me dance." Maya waved off his gratitude with a laugh. "Don't mention it. Like I said, it was fun. Besides, you're a great dancer." She winked at him, then turned to Richard. "What can I get you two tonight?" Richard hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something. Do you ever get tired of this place, working here, I mean?" Maya raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. "Not really. Sure, it's not glamorous, but I like it here. The people are nice, and it gives me a chance to help out my mom." "Why do you ask?" Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He wasn't used to having personal conversations with strangers, especially ones like Maya, but something about her honesty made him want to keep talking. "I was just wondering if you've ever thought about doing something else. Something bigger." Maya chuckled softly. "Bigger isn't always better, Mr. Hartman. Sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference." Her words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Here she was, working a modest job in a small-town diner, yet she carried herself with more wisdom than most of the executives he dealt with daily. She understood something he had forgotten, that value wasn't measured in dollars or titles, but in the impact you had on others. For the rest of the meal, Richard couldn't stop thinking about what Maya had said. As they ate, she checked in on them regularly, chatting briefly with Daniel about school and hobbies. Each interaction was genuine, free of pretense or judgment. By the time they left, Richard felt lighter somehow, as though a burden he hadn't fully acknowledged was beginning to lift. On the drive home, Daniel asked, "Dad, why did you ask Maya all those questions?" Richard hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Because she reminded me of something important. Sometimes we spend so much time chasing big dreams that we forget the little things matter too." Daniel nodded slowly, processing his father's words. Then, after a pause, he said, "I think I know what you mean. Dancing with Maya felt special. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real." Richard glanced at his son, feeling a swell of emotion in his chest. For years he had tried to give Daniel everything money could buy, hoping it would fill the void left by his absence. But now he understood that what Daniel truly needed was simpler and harder to provide. Love, attention, and trust couldn't be purchased. They had to be given freely and sincerely. From that night on, Richard began to change. He started spending more time with Daniel, carving out hours in his schedule that had once been reserved for meetings or business calls. They went to parks, movies, and yes, even back to Mama Lou's. With each visit, Maya became more than just a waitress to them. She became a friend, someone who reminded Richard of the importance of connection and authenticity. Through her actions, Maya taught Richard that being a father wasn't about providing material comforts. It was about showing up. It was about listening, supporting, and believing in your child, even when the world doubted them. And as Richard embraced this new perspective, he discovered something unexpected: healing, not just for Daniel but for himself. Over the weeks that followed, Richard and Daniel became regulars at Mama Lou's. Each visit felt like a small step toward rebuilding what they had lost, a bond that went deeper than money or convenience. Maya always greeted them with her warm smile, making sure to chat with Daniel about his day or ask Richard how work was going. She never treated them differently because of their wealth, nor did she shy away from speaking her mind when the moment called for it. Her straightforwardness intrigued Richard. In a world where people often tiptoed around him, Maya's honesty was refreshing. One evening, as the diner buzzed with its usual energy, Maya surprised them by sitting down at their table during a rare lull in her shift. "You two are becoming my favorite customers," she joked, leaning back in the booth with a playful grin. "But I've got to know, what keeps bringing you back here? It can't just be the food." Richard exchanged a glance with Daniel, who shrugged, leaving the answer up to his father. Richard hesitated for a moment, then said, "Maybe it's the company." Maya laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Well, I'm flattered. But seriously, there's something about this place, isn't there? People come here not just to eat, but to feel connected." Her words lingered in the air, simple yet profound. Connected. That was exactly what Richard had been searching for without even realizing it. He thought back to all the years he'd spent pouring himself into his business, chasing success while neglecting the one person who mattered most. Now, sitting in this humble diner with his son, he finally understood what true connection meant. The weeks turned into months. Richard began to notice subtle changes in both himself and Daniel. For one, Daniel seemed more confident. At school, he started joining clubs and participating in activities he'd once avoided, afraid of being judged. When Richard asked him about it, Daniel admitted, "I guess I realized it's okay to try, even if I'm not perfect, just like when I danced with Maya." Those words stayed with Richard long after the conversation ended. They reminded him of the lesson Maya had unknowingly taught them both, that life wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, taking risks, and embracing imperfection. And slowly but surely, Richard found himself applying that same philosophy to his role as a father. He started attending Daniel's school events, cheering loudly from the sidelines during basketball games or clapping enthusiastically at art shows. At first, Daniel was surprised by his father's sudden presence, but soon he grew used to it, and grateful for it. Their relationship shifted in ways Richard hadn't anticipated. Conversations flowed more easily between them, filled with laughter, and shared memories rather than awkward silences. Meanwhile, Richard's friendship with Maya deepened. Though they came from vastly different worlds, they discovered they had much to learn from each other. Maya shared stories about growing up in the town, working multiple jobs to support her family and finding joy in the little things. Richard listened intently, marveling at her resilience and perspective. In return, he opened up about his own struggles, his wife's passing, his guilt over not being present enough for Daniel, and his fear of failing as a father. "You're doing better than you think," Maya told him one evening after Daniel had gone to the restroom. "Being here, showing up, it means everything. Trust me, I see it every time he walks through that door." Her words reassured Richard, but they also challenged him to keep pushing forward. He realized that healing wasn't a destination. It was a journey. Every day offered a new opportunity to strengthen his bond with Daniel and become the kind of father he wanted to be. As summer approached, Richard decided to take things a step further. He surprised Daniel one Saturday morning by announcing they were going on a road trip. "Just us," he said, handing Daniel a map marked with several stops along the way. "No phones, no meetings, just you, me, and the open road." Daniel's eyes lit up with excitement. "Really? Where are we going?" Richard smiled, feeling a sense of adventure he hadn't felt in years. "Wherever the road takes us." The trip proved to be transformative. They visited small towns, hiked scenic trails, and explored roadside diners that reminded them of Mama Lou's. Along the way, they talked about everything: dreams, fears, hopes for the future. Richard learned more about Daniel's passions, from photography to music, and encouraged him to pursue them wholeheartedly. In turn, Daniel opened up about how much it meant to have his father actively involved in his life. By the time they returned home, Richard felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew he still had work to do, moments where he might stumble or fall short. But for the first time in years, he felt hopeful. Hopeful that he could continue to grow as a father, that he could create a life rich with meaning rather than material wealth. Back at Mama Lou's, Maya noticed the change in Richard almost immediately. There was a lightness to him now, a warmth that hadn't been there before. One evening, as she cleared their plates, she teased, "You seem different lately. Did the road trip fix you?" Richard chuckled, shaking his head. "Not quite, but it helped me remember what's important." Maya nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes all it takes is a little reminder. You've got a good kid there, Mr. Hartman. Don't let go of that." "I won't," Richard promised, his voice firm. "And thank you for everything." Maya smiled, brushing off his gratitude as she always did. But deep down, she knew she'd played a part in their transformation. Not because she'd done anything extraordinary, but because she'd shown them the power of kindness, trust, and connection. As the months passed, Richard made it a point to stay grounded. He scaled back his work commitments, prioritizing quality time with Daniel instead. Together, they built a life filled with laughter, exploration, and mutual respect. And though Richard would never forget the pain of losing his wife, he found solace in knowing that he was honoring her memory by being the best father he could be. Through it all, Maya remained a constant presence in their lives. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was family. On Daniel's 18th birthday, Richard invited her to join them for dinner at a fancy restaurant downtown. It was a far cry from Mama Lou's, but Maya fit right in, her charm lighting up the room. As they toasted to Daniel's future, Richard raised his glass and said simply, "To second chances, and to the people who help us find them." Tears glistened in Maya's eyes as she clinked her glass against his. "Here's to love," she replied softly, "because that's what it's really all about." And in that moment, surrounded by the people who mattered most, Richard knew he had finally found his way home. The months rolled on, and Richard's life continued to transform in ways he never imagined. What had started as a simple dinner at Mama Lou's had blossomed into something far greater, a journey of healing, growth, and rediscovery. He no longer saw his wealth as the measure of his success. Instead, he found fulfillment in moments that couldn't be bought or quantified. Each day brought new opportunities to connect with Daniel, and Richard embraced them wholeheartedly. One crisp autumn afternoon, Richard surprised Daniel with an invitation to visit a local community center. It wasn't just any community center. It was a place where people of all ages and abilities came together to learn, play, and support one another. Richard had heard about it from Maya, who volunteered there occasionally. "They're hosting a dance night this weekend," she'd told him during one of their conversations. "You should take Daniel. I think he'd enjoy it." At first, Richard hesitated. The memory of Daniel dancing with Maya at the diner still lingered vividly in his mind. but he worried about putting too much pressure on his son. Would Daniel feel comfortable dancing in front of strangers? Would he even want to go? To Richard's relief, Daniel didn't hesitate when he mentioned the idea. "That sounds fun," he said enthusiastically. "Can Maya come too?" Richard smiled, touched by Daniel's fondness for Maya. "I'll ask her," he replied. And so, they made plans to attend the event together. On the evening of the dance, the community center buzzed with excitement. Colorful streamers hung from the ceiling and tables lined the walls piled high with snacks and drinks. A small stage held a DJ booth, where upbeat music spilled out into the room. People of all ages mingled, laughing and chatting as they waited for the dancing to begin. Maya arrived shortly after Richard and Daniel did, wearing a bright yellow dress that seemed to match her personality perfectly. She greeted them with her usual warmth, giving Daniel a playful hug. "Ready to show everyone how it's done?" she teased. Daniel grinned, looking more confident than ever. "Maybe you'll have to teach me some new moves tonight." As the music shifted to a slower tempo, Maya took Daniel's hand and led him onto the makeshift dance floor. This time, however, they weren't alone. Other couples joined them, moving gracefully or awkwardly, depending on their skill level. But no one cared about perfection. Everyone was simply enjoying themselves. Richard stood off to the side, watching proudly as Daniel swayed with Maya. His son's confidence amazed him. Gone was the boy who once shied away from attention, replaced by someone unafraid to embrace life fully. Richard felt a surge of gratitude, not only for Daniel's growth but also for Maya's role in helping him see his potential. A woman approached Richard while he watched the dancers, introducing herself as the organizer of the event. "Your son is wonderful," she said warmly. "He has such a positive energy." Richard nodded, his chest swelling with pride. "Thank you. He's come a long way." The woman smiled knowingly. "Sometimes, all it takes is believing in someone." "Looks like you figured that out." Her words resonated deeply with Richard. Believing in someone. That was exactly what Maya had done for Daniel that fateful night at the diner. She hadn't seen his disability as a limitation. Instead, she'd focused on his ability to lead, to create joy. That belief had sparked a chain reaction, changing not only Daniel's life but Richard's as well. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew livelier. Children ran around playing tag, teenagers laughed over board games, and adults chatted animatedly at the snack tables. Richard found himself drawn into conversations with other parents, sharing stories and exchanging advice. For the first time, in years, he felt part of a community rather than an outsider looking in. When the final song of the night began to play, Maya returned to Richard's side, leaving Daniel to dance with a group of kids who had eagerly invited him to join them. "Looks like he's having the time of his life," she said, nodding toward Daniel. "He really is," Richard agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "I owe so much of that to you, Maya. You've changed our lives in ways I can't put into words." Maya shook her head modestly. "I didn't do anything special. I just gave him a chance to shine." "But that's the thing," Richard insisted. "Not everyone would have done that. You saw something in him that others might have missed. And because of you, I learned to see it too." Maya looked at him thoughtfully, her expression softening. "You're a good dad, Mr. Hartman. Don't forget that." Her words stayed with Richard long after the dance ended. On the drive home, Daniel talked nonstop about the evening, recounting every detail with excitement. Richard listened quietly, marveling at how far they'd both come since that first night at Mama Lou's. Back then, he'd been unsure of how to connect with his son, afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. Now, he felt equipped to handle whatever challenges lay ahead. Over the next few weeks, Richard threw himself into volunteering at the community center. Inspired by Maya's example, he offered to help organize events, mentor young people, and even teach a financial literacy workshop. At first, he worried that others might view him differently because of his wealth, but he quickly realized that his background didn't matter. What mattered was his willingness to contribute, to give back in meaningful ways. Through his work at the center, Richard met countless individuals who inspired him. There was Maria, a single mother raising 3 children while working 2 jobs. James, a retired teacher who spent his days tutoring struggling students. And Ella, a teenager determined to start her own business despite the odds stacked against her. Each person reminded Richard of the resilience and strength that existed within communities, often hidden beneath the surface. Meanwhile, Daniel continued to thrive. With his newfound confidence, he decided to join the school's debate team, surprising even himself with his natural talent for public speaking. When he won his first competition, Richard cheered louder than anyone else in the audience. Afterward, they celebrated with pizza and ice cream, reminiscing about how far Daniel had come since the days when he barely spoke above a whisper. "You know," Daniel said between bites of pepperoni pizza, "I think I finally understand why you kept taking me to Mama Lou's." Richard raised an eyebrow, curious. "Why's that?" "Because it wasn't just about the food or Maya," Daniel explained. "It was about showing me that I could do things I never thought I could. Like dancing or debating, or anything really." Richard felt a lump rise in his throat. "And did I succeed?" Daniel grinned, his eyes shining with sincerity. "Yeah, Dad, you did." That moment solidified everything Richard had been working toward. He hadn't fixed everything overnight, nor had he erased the pain of losing his wife. But he had created something beautiful, a relationship built on trust, love, and shared experiences. And through it all, Maya had been a guiding light, reminding him of the importance of kindness and authenticity. As winter approached, Richard decided to host a holiday party at the community center. He wanted to bring together the people who had touched his life, the volunteers, the families, and of course Maya. It was a way of saying thank you, not just for their support, but for teaching him what truly mattered. The night of the party, the center was alive with laughter and cheer. Twinkling lights adorned the walls and festive music played softly in the background. Everyone mingled freely, sharing stories and enjoying the delicious spread of homemade dishes. Richard stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. "When date you?" Maya walked in, bundled up in a cozy sweater and scarf. Richard greeted her with a hug. "Thank you for coming," he said sincerely. "This wouldn't have been possible without you." Maya smiled, waving off his gratitude as usual. "Stop thanking me already. Tonight's about celebrating, remember?" And celebrate they did. As the night unfolded, Richard watched with awe as the room filled with warmth and connection. Strangers became friends, and friendships deepened into something stronger. In that moment, surrounded by the people who had helped shape his journey, Richard knew he had found his purpose. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was rich with meaning. Through love, patience, and a willingness to grow, Richard had rebuilt not only his relationship with Daniel, but also his understanding of what it meant to live fully. And though he still had much to learn, he faced the future with hope, knowing that the best was yet to come. The holiday party at the community center marked a turning point for Richard. It wasn't just an evening of celebration, it was a reminder of how interconnected lives could be, even in the simplest ways. As he looked around the room filled with laughter, music, and shared meals, Richard realized that every person there had contributed to his journey in some small but significant way. From Maya's quiet wisdom to the resilience of parents like Maria, these individuals had taught him lessons no business deal or boardroom meeting ever could. In the weeks following the party, Richard found himself reflecting on his own life more deeply. For years, he had defined success by numbers, profits, deals closed, assets acquired. But now, surrounded by people who measured their worth differently, he began to question those values. What good was wealth if it didn't bring joy, connection, or purpose? Slowly, he started making changes, not drastic ones, but meaningful ones, that aligned with this new perspective. One of the first things Richard did was reevaluate his company's mission. His business empire spanned multiple industries, employing thousands of people across the country. Yet despite its size, it felt impersonal, driven solely by profit margins and market trends. Richard decided it was time to change that. He called a meeting with his executive team and proposed shifting the focus toward projects that benefited communities directly, building affordable housing, funding education programs, and supporting local businesses. At first, his team was skeptical. "You're talking about investing in areas that won't yield immediate returns," one of them said cautiously. "Are you sure this is the right move?" Richard nodded firmly. "Yes, I am. Profits are important, but so is impact. If we can improve lives while growing our business, why wouldn't we do both?" His conviction inspired others to follow suit. Over the next few months, Richard oversaw the launch of several initiatives aimed at giving back. One project involved partnering with the community center to create a scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in fields like teaching, healthcare, and social work. Another focused on renovating parks and recreational spaces in underserved neighborhoods. Each step forward brought Richard closer to the vision he'd begun to form, a legacy built not on wealth alone, but on kindness and service. Meanwhile, Daniel continued to flourish under his father's encouragement. Now 18 and nearing graduation, he had developed a passion for photography, capturing moments of beauty in everyday life. Richard noticed how much effort Daniel put into his craft, often spending hours editing photos late into the night. Determined to support his son's dreams, Richard surprised him with a professional camera as a gift. "This is incredible," Daniel exclaimed, holding up the sleek device with wide eyes. "But Dad, are you sure? This must have cost a fortune." Richard laughed, shaking his head. "Money isn't what matters here. What matters is that you're happy doing something you love. Use this to tell your story, Daniel. Show the world what you see." Touched by his father's words, Daniel promised to make the most of the gift. He began submitting his work to local galleries and online platforms, slowly building a portfolio that showcased his unique perspective. When one of his photos, a breathtaking shot of a sunset over the town lake, was featured in a regional magazine, Richard couldn't have been prouder. As spring approached, Richard and Daniel planned another road trip, this time to visit some of the places where Richard's company was making a difference. They traveled to towns where new schools were being built, met families moving into renovated homes, and attended ribbon-cutting ceremonies for community gardens. Along the way, they documented their experiences, taking photos and jotting down notes to share with Maya when they returned. When they finally arrived back at Mama Lou's after the trip, Maya greeted them with her usual warmth. "Welcome back, travelers. How was the adventure?" "It was amazing," Daniel replied, pulling out his camera to show her some of the photos he'd taken. "Look at this one. We helped plant trees in this park." Maya studied the image, her smile widening. "Wow, you two really know how to make an impact." Richard leaned back in the booth, watching the exchange with satisfaction. "We couldn't have done any of it without your inspiration, Maya. You reminded us what truly matters." Maya waved off his praise, though her cheeks flushed slightly, with pride. "I didn't do anything special. You're the ones putting in the hard work." "That may be true," Richard admitted. "But sometimes all it takes is someone pointing you in the right direction. And that's exactly what you did for us." Their conversation shifted to lighter topics as they enjoyed plates of fried chicken and mashed potatoes. Maya teased Daniel about his growing photography skills, while Richard shared funny stories from their travels. The diner buzzed with its usual energy, yet the bond between the three of them felt stronger than ever. Later that evening, as they prepared to leave, Richard handed Maya an envelope. "This is for you," he said simply, curious. Maya opened it and gasped. Inside was a check for a substantial amount of money. "Mr. Hartman, I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," Richard insisted gently. "Consider it an investment in your future. You've given so much to others, including us. Let us give something back." Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Richard replied. "Just keep being you. That's more than enough." On the drive home, Daniel turned to his father with a thoughtful expression. Do you think Maya will use the money to open her own place someday? Like a bigger version of Mama Lou's? Richard chuckled. Maybe. Or maybe she'll use it to travel, go to school, or start something completely different. Whatever she chooses, I trust her to make it meaningful. Daniel nodded, leaning back in his seat. She deserves it. She's changed our lives, Dad. Forever. Those words stayed with Richard long after they reached home. As he tucked himself into bed that night, he reflected on how far they'd come since that first dinner at Mama Lo's. Back then, he'd been lost, unsure of how to bridge the gap between him and his son. Now he felt grounded, connected not only to Daniel but also to a community that had welcomed him with open arms. Life still presented challenges, of course. There were days when Richard questioned his decisions or worried about the future. But through it all, he carried a sense of peace, the kind that comes from knowing you're living authentically, with purpose and love. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the windows, Richard woke up early and made breakfast for Daniel. Pancakes, bacon, and fresh fruit filled the kitchen table, along with a handwritten note. To my son, who reminds me daily what it means to live fully. When Daniel came downstairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes, he smiled at the sight. What's all this for? For you, Richard said, pouring syrup over a stack of pancakes. Because you inspire me every single day. They ate together, laughing and planning their next adventure. Outside, the world moved on as usual, busy and chaotic. But inside the house, there was a quiet contentment, a sense that no matter what happened, they would face it together. And somewhere in the distance, Maya stood behind the counter at Mama Lou's, humming along to the jukebox as she served customers with her trademark smile. Unbeknownst to her, she had sparked a ripple effect, one that would continue to spread, touching lives far beyond her small-town diner. As the seasons changed once again, Richard and Daniel found themselves settling into a rhythm that felt natural and fulfilling. Their bond had grown stronger with each passing day, built on shared experiences, open conversations, and mutual respect. Richard no longer saw himself as just a provider. He was now actively present in every aspect of Daniel's life, celebrating his successes, supporting him through challenges, and simply enjoying moments of quiet companionship. One crisp spring morning, Richard received an unexpected phone call from Maya. Her voice carried excitement as she told him about her plans to pursue a dream she'd kept tucked away for years, opening her own cafe. I've been thinking about it for a while, she explained, and with the help of that check you gave me, I finally feel ready to take the leap. Richard couldn't have been happier. That's wonderful news, Maya. You'll do amazing things, I know it. Maya laughed softly, gratitude evident in her tone. Well, don't get too excited yet. It's going to take a lot of work, but I'm ready for the challenge. Over the next few months, Richard threw his support behind Maya's venture. He offered guidance on navigating permits, securing suppliers, and marketing strategies, drawing from his own business expertise. At the same time, Daniel used his photography skills to capture images of the cafe's progress, creating a visual story of its transformation. Together, they became part of Maya's journey, watching with pride as her vision came to life. The grand opening of Maya's cafe was set for early summer, and the entire town buzzed with anticipation. Located just a block away from Mama Lou's, the cozy space featured warm wooden tables, shelves lined with books, and walls adorned with Daniel's photographs. A chalkboard menu listed homemade soups, freshly baked pastries, and signature drinks, named after local landmarks. The atmosphere was inviting, a perfect blend of comfort and creativity. On opening day, the line stretched out the door, filled with friends, neighbors, and curious newcomers eager to see what Maya had created. Richard and Daniel arrived early, carrying trays of flowers and balloons to decorate the entrance. When Maya spotted them, she rushed over, her face glowing with happiness. You didn't have to bring anything, she said, hugging them both. Just being here means so much. We wouldn't miss it for the world, Richard replied sincerely. This is your moment, Maya. Enjoy it. As the doors opened and customers poured in, Maya moved effortlessly between tables, greeting everyone with her trademark smile. She introduced Richard and Daniel to patrons who hadn't met them before, proudly sharing how their friendship had inspired her along the way. Watching her interact with people, Richard marveled at her ability to make others feel seen and valued, a gift she had extended to him and Daniel when they needed it most. Later that afternoon, during a brief lull in activity, Maya joined Richard and Daniel at a corner table. "So," she began, leaning back in her chair, "what do you think? Does it feel like home?" "It feels better than home," Daniel joked, taking another bite of a chocolate croissant. "Honestly, Maya, this place is incredible. You should be proud." Maya blushed, shaking her head modestly. "I couldn't have done it without you two. You've been my cheerleaders from the start." Richard smiled, reaching across the table to pat her hand. "And you've been ours. Don't forget that." Their conversation drifted toward the future. Maya's hopes for the cafe, Daniel's plans after high school graduation, and Richard's ongoing efforts to reshape his company's mission. Each of them spoke with enthusiasm, their dreams intertwined yet distinct. For the first time in years, Richard felt a deep sense of alignment between his personal and professional lives. Success wasn't just about achieving goals, it was about lifting others up along the way. As the weeks passed, Maya's Cafe quickly became a beloved fixture in the community. Families gathered for weekend brunches, students studied at the book-lined tables, and locals stopped by daily for coffee and conversation. Richard made it a point to visit often, sometimes alone and other times with Daniel. On one such visit, he struck up a conversation with a young woman flipping through a photo album displayed near the counter. "These are beautiful," she said, pointing to one of Daniel's pictures. "Who took them?" "His name's Daniel," Richard replied, gesturing toward his son who was chatting with Maya behind the counter. "He's got quite the eye for detail." The woman nodded appreciatively. "Tell him these photos make the whole place feel alive." Richard relayed the compliment to Daniel later that evening, grinning as his son's face lit up with pride. "See?" he teased. "Your talent's rubbing off on everyone around here." Daniel shrugged, though his smile betrayed his modesty. "It's not just me. Maya's the one who makes this place special." That sentiment echoed throughout the summer, as more and more people discovered the magic of Maya's Cafe. What started as a small dream had blossomed into something far greater, a hub of connection, creativity, and kindness. And for Richard, it served as a reminder of the ripple effect one act of generosity could create. By fall, Daniel stood on the brink of a new chapter in his life. Accepted to a prestigious art school several states away, he prepared to leave home for the first time. While Richard knew it was an exciting opportunity, he couldn't deny the pang of sadness that came with saying goodbye. They spent their final weeks together, cherishing every moment, hiking favorite trails, revisiting old haunts, and savoring meals at Maya's Cafe. On Daniel's last night before leaving, Richard hosted a small gathering at the cafe to celebrate. Friends, family, and neighbors gathered around, sharing stories and laughter as the sun dipped below the horizon. Maya stood beside Daniel, holding up a slice of cake decorated with the words, "Congratulations, dreamer," in bold icing. "To Daniel," she said, raising her glass, "may your adventures be endless and your heart always full." Everyone cheered, clinking glasses and applauding as Daniel blushed under the attention. When the noise settled, he cleared his throat and addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for being here tonight and for everything you've done for me over the years. But most of all, thank you, Dad. You've taught me that life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain." Richard blinked back tears, pulling his son into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you, Daniel. Always remember that." The next morning, as Richard drove Daniel to the airport, neither of them spoke much. Words seemed unnecessary. The weight of their bond spoke louder than any farewell ever could. At the terminal, they embraced one last time before Daniel disappeared through security, waving until he was out of sight. Returning home, Richard felt a mix of emotions: pride, nostalgia, and a tinge of loneliness. Yet as he entered Maya's cafe later that afternoon, the familiar warmth enveloped him like a comforting embrace. Maya greeted him with a knowing smile, setting a steaming cup of coffee on the counter. "He'll be okay, you know," she said, gently. "You raised an amazing kid." "I hope so," Richard replied, sipping his coffee. "But I also know I couldn't have done it without you, without all of this." Maya tilted her head thoughtfully. "Life has a funny way of bringing us exactly where we need to be. Maybe this cafe is yours and Daniel's forever home, even if it's miles apart." Her words stayed with Richard long after he left the cafe that evening. As he walked under the soft glow of streetlights, he realized that home wasn't a place, it was a feeling of belonging, of love, of purpose. And thanks to Maya, Daniel, and the countless others who had touched his life, Richard had found it. In the months that followed, Richard continued to visit the cafe regularly, exchanging letters and video calls with Daniel as he embarked on his new journey. Through it all, he remained grateful, not just for the opportunities wealth had afforded him, but for the lessons learned in humility, connection, and trust. Maya's cafe thrived, becoming a cornerstone of the community. Richard's company expanded its charitable initiatives, impacting lives across the country. And Daniel, armed with his camera and boundless curiosity, captured the beauty of the world beyond their small town. Together, they proved that life's greatest treasures weren't measured in dollars or achievements. They were found in the moments shared, the hearts touched, and the dreams nurtured. In the end, Richard understood that true success wasn't about building empires. It was about building bridges to others, to oneself, and to a brighter, kinder future.